Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Vedic Astrology podcast. My name is Fiona Marks. Today, we're looking at the extraordinary yogas of King Charles III. The episode has come about because last night we were at Astrolojam and we wanted to look this month at compatibility. So I selected for us the charts to look at, and I thought King Charles would be great because we've got two marriages that we could look at, and very timely because his coronation is imminent. And we had so much fun looking at these charts last night. We looked at them both in tropical and sidereal, and of course both spouses, and then we looked at several ways to have insights about the compatibility of various partnerships. So it was a great get together. I really enjoyed preparing for the Astrolojam because when we're looking at compatibility, we can definitely run different charts through various particular filters and see if this matches up or if various aspects are flattering or difficult. And we did look at that stuff, but it's also important to really spend some time understanding each chart as an individual person, what it is that they're looking for, what it is that's going to make them happy, what they're looking for in a partner, what issues in the chart, in their own chart, do they have with that planet that represents the partner. All of these kind of issues and approaches. And it was when I was researching King Charles' chart, I just found some really enjoyable, interesting yogas, and I wanted to share those with you because I just had so much fun looking at it yesterday. So let's begin by having a look at King Charles's chart. If you're watching on the video, you can see it on screen. If you're listening on the podcast, just relax, clear your mind, and let's talk our way through each house of this chart and see whether you can visually construct that in your mind. I'm using the tropical chart today, and that gives me a Leo rising, so a Leo ascendant for this chart with no planets in Leo. Saturn is in the second house in Virgo. Venus is in the third house in Libra. And then in the fourth house of Scorpio, I have the Sun, the ascendant lord, plus Mercury, plus Ketu, all in the fourth house in Scorpio. And in the fifth house, I have Mars and Jupiter. Nothing in the sixth house Capricorn, nothing in the seventh house Aquarius, nothing in the eighth house Pisces, nothing in the ninth house of Aries. However, in Taurus, the 10th house, I have an exalted moon with Rahu, and then no planets in the 11th house, Gemini, and no planets in the 12th house of Cancer. So this has given us one tour around the 12 houses of Prince Charles's chart. You'll notice that we have planets on angles. So we've got Sun, Mercury, and Ketu in the fourth house. We also have Rahu and the moon in the 10th house. And by and large, we have planets in good dignity. So the Sun is in great friend in Scorpio. The moon is exalted in Taurus. Mars is neutral in Sagittarius. Mercury is friend in Scorpio. Jupiter is own home in Sagittarius. Venus is also own home in Libra. And Saturn is in great friend in Virgo. So as we begin looking at the chart, when we have a king and the ascending sign is Leo, one feels that's a good start. That seems very fitting. And it creates for us the sun as the ascendant lord. And that also makes sense for a king, right? We want to see the sun. However, this sun in this chart happens to have low Shadbala. It's actually only got 75% of the Shadbala that it needs. It's quite low in Digbala Shadbala, so just 26%. It's only got 7% of Ayana Bala. and 14% of what it needs in terms of Chestabala. So this tells us straight away that although this is a Leo ascendant and we think that the sun is this great match for the energy of a king, seems very fitting, this particular sun is not the strongest, most potent planet in the chart. In fact, it's the weakest planet in this chart. And it's suffering quite some weaknesses around the Shadbalas. For example, that 14% of Chestabala. When we think of Leo in a king's chart, we're hoping automatically, I think we're all jumping to that conclusion of having a bright sun that leads everybody, that's up the front, that people look towards and see the light. So in this case, that's not this particular sun. Not only that, the sun is in the 4th house, which is the house that's underneath planet Earth when we're born. So it's a hidden house. It's not that brightest top of the sky midday sun or mid-afternoon sun. And on top of that, it is with the 11th Lord, although it's a Raj Yoga, the first Lord going into the 4th house, making the trinal first Lord in an angular 4th house. We actually have the 11th Lord. Mercury is ruling the 2nd house and the 11th house, and it's right there in the 4th house. So we have that issue for the sun to deal with. The Raja Yogas give us that sense of grace, that all of our actions are just being supported, and it's like having the wind in your sails, isn't it? You feel that everything is with you. And yet here we are, we've got this 11th Lord spanner in the works with its placement there also in the 4th house. The sun is being significantly starved in Lachitariya Vastas by Saturn. Quite some points they're taking it theoretically to negative points. And also it's with Ketu. Ketu is indicating a place in the chart where, although we do have expertise, so we've developed all of our skills and experience there, that's what Ketu is showing us. It's also showing that in this lifetime, this is probably an area of dissatisfaction or disappointment where no matter what we do, we inside ourselves feel that we can't recapture that great feeling that we've had with the sun before. So all of these factors of tempering our initial enthusiasm for having a Leo ascendant for a king's chart, when we look at this particular sun, it's not actually giving off that energy that we would be looking for in the leadership connection with the sun. Not only that, there are some other things going on as well. We've got in that 4th house, you've probably worked out, because we have a planet with a node. So we've got Mercury with Ketu and a malefic, the sun. We can say that there is a shamed avashta taking place here in the 4th house. Some people may also consider that in the 5th house, we also have a planet, Jupiter, with a natural malefic. I love to use my Lajatati Avashtas like a periodic table. I can see how they're laid out and which Avashtas work for which planet. So if we were to look up Mercury shamed by the sun when Ketu's involved, it can create a situation where the person feels that their contribution is not appreciated and they feel the shame that they should be making such a good contribution. They've, with the sun, Mercury is delighted by the sun and feels it close to greatness. And yet, no matter what this person does, they just feel that their contribution's not being appreciated, makes them feel like perhaps they're worthless, and they really don't know how to have a positive impact. So they might even end up withdrawing. And I think that's a really interesting reflection here, isn't it, when we think about what we know of King Charles' life, that he's been in the wings waiting to get on the main stage, that many of us don't know what it is that we're going to do with our life. But this is someone who was, from the moment that he was born, it was very clear what he was going to do with his life, except that he has had to wait a long time for that. And how does one make a contribution when one is still waiting to take on the role? You don't want to detract from that monarch who is actually doing their job. You have your own opinions or your own things that you think are important, but you don't have necessarily the power or the endorsement to really do anything. I think this Mercury Shamedavashta is very interesting in the 4th house. Also, as Mercury is ruling the 2nd house and the 11th house, we know that those are both financial houses. So perhaps this person feels shame about the wealth that they have or feels some uncomfortableness about that too. There's that angle as well. And now, as we said, possibly we could consider that Jupiter is being also shamed. So you want to look up your notes about calculating Lajjatati Avashtas. I have on screen my little flow chart that I use, and if a planet is conjunct Sun, Mars, or Saturn in the 5th house, that can also create a Shamedavashta, even though the node is not involved, because it's a 5th house, a house that's so involved in our creating our legacy, creating our own kingdom, in a way creating our identity. Then it's easy, if there's these difficult indications, having a malefic with another planet, that these can create shameful events. So if we were to look at that in my Lajjatati Avashtas periodic table, when it's in the 5th house, Jupiter with Mars can feel so motivated to do good, but they don't listen to authority figures, and then they do things which are not approved of. And I think there's a few ways to see this possibly in King Charles's life, that he has, especially in earlier days, been a bit outspoken about architecture is one of the things that he's famous for. In some ways, perhaps outspoken a little bit about landscape design or our integration with nature. And he's been a big supporter of the environment. So these are good things, but at times, and we're going back in time, he's been on the public stage for a long time, perhaps saying things that were not the official line, and perhaps destabilizing people or getting criticized for being a bit outspoken. So I think it's interesting to see how that Avashta has shown up in his life. So we know that there are possibly some shamed Avashtas going on in this chart. We've talked about the Sun being in a difficult position, as well as that all of the Shadbala across the board for Digbala is quite low, apart from for Venus. So that being able to listen to the right direction to take and when to take it, those were all low. The planets are low in Ayana Bala as well, apart from Mercury. And this kind of gives the idea that this person, when it comes to conflict, according to the Shadbala, not going to be able to call on the Sun, Moon, Mars, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn to resolve those problems. It's really only Mercury who's going to be able to naturally make a contribution. And one of the interpretations that I would say for that is that this person is probably going to lean on managing their way out of conflict situations rather than using some other strength. So the Sun, when it's in a conflict situation, is going to be able to bring everybody on board, look after the needs, be protective of the needs of all of the subjects and all of the people involved, to find that highest vision that's going to help unite people and resolve conflict. If it's the Moon, being able to just go with the cut and thrust of what's taking place and be adaptable and come up with solutions that work in the reality of the moment, rather than perhaps when the Moon is low in Ayana Bala, sometimes we stick our foot in the mud and take a stand, and we can be a bit of a sore loser about things that make it hard for other people around us to resolve those conflicts. And on each planet has its various strengths for resolving conflict, but in this chart, all of them apart from Mercury are low. And then Cheshtabala as well is very low, apart from for the Moon. The Moon is the strongest planet in Shadbala. In this chart, it's very strong. And it's the 12th Lord in this chart. And we know that this person is quite a spiritual person, quite a, in some ways, introverted, soft-spoken person. So in that, having the 12th Lord be the strongest in Shadbala is maybe an indication there. But with a king, we would be expecting and wanting the Cheshtavala to be high. That would be the natural assumption. So all of them are low apart from the moon. And the thing to remember about the moon with high Shadbala is that although the moon has no enemies, it is certainly an enemy for other planets. So in the larger Vashtas, moon can starve several planets, and in this chart it certainly does. And when it's got a lot of points, it can inflict quite some damage. And we know in this chart that moon is with Rahu in the 10th. The 10th is that most visible house. So the moon with Rahu is a unusual combination, giving us an idea that this person is here to develop their mind and their emotions. And I've got on screen a quote that's in Kala about Rahu and the moon, and it says, Rahu and the moon can be a result of the mind not being centered in the heart. I find that a really lovely insight into Rahu and the moon. It goes on to say that it might cause some discontent and depression, a sense that the world doesn't have what one needs in order to feel fulfilled. So that's very interesting, isn't it? Because this person is obviously born into wealth that you and I probably can't even imagine what it's like to live like that. But perhaps that wasn't satisfying or wasn't what this person really needed. And if we go back and have a look at the chart, another way to look at that moon and Rahu would be the moon representing the mother, having an unusual, unconventional mother, and maybe a very famous mother in the 10th house here, exalted in Taurus. So from this person's perspective, the mother is unusual, isn't it? Because clearly she is his mother and loves him and is very happy that he's here and he's the heir to this legacy. They've got a connection that only very few people in the world can understand, being born. I guess she wasn't even born to be a monarch. So there's no denying the very important relationship. At the same time, she is someone with a full-time job all of her life, every day of the year, a role that is completely enmeshed with her identity, and one wonders how emotionally available or even just available she was able to be for this child. So looking only from his perspective towards that moon as the mother. So although she is very famous and is considered to have been a really excellent queen, done a really great role, what was that experience like for the person living in this chart? And it's interesting, isn't it? Because the relationship with the mother is associated with that 4th house, and we know we've got a Shamdavashta there. And the moon Rahu can create someone whose maybe own emotions are unconventional as well. They're going to get flashes of inspiration and perhaps flashes of feeling, sensations, intuition that are from left field or from out of this world. And maybe the environment that he's been born into is heavy with tradition, heavy with cultural obligations. And this is feeding perhaps into that Shamdavashta that's happening in the 4th, maybe ashamed of one's emotions. The mother is interlinked in all of this as well. So it's like reinforcing internal shame about emotions and inability to express oneself emotionally, even though it's really important. And the advice from Ernst through Carla is connecting with the heart. And this might have been a difficult thing to connect with the heart. We've got a Shamdavashta in the 4th house, and we've got an environment that we know is culturally quite restrained and maybe a little uptight kind of energy. We would look at it from the outside, maybe with those kind of descriptors. So some interesting things going on there. And then maybe that's even more also highlighted by having Saturn in the 2nd house, knowing that the 2nd house relates to immediate family and our early childhood, that Saturn in the 2nd house perhaps here indicating a difficult early childhood environment. And that's maybe backed up by this moon Rahu plus Ketu and the Shamdavashta in the 4th. all of those things giving us a sense that this person's introduction to life and their possibly quite unique and astounding emotional experience with the moon with Rahu just not in any way kind of being possible given the structure of the chart and the life. And then quite separate to that, Saturn on the second house can also make the things that we say unattractive, or some of those gaffes that we make or we don't necessarily express very clearly or very beautifully. The voice can be affected by these things. It's really interesting from that leap off point of, wow, we've got a king with a Leo ascendant. This is, perfect, fantastic. And then you actually look at the layout of the chart and that this is maybe not a strong chart, doesn't have that confidence and those placements where the sun is at the top of the sky and very auspicious and glowing and full of confidence. So it's quite a different picture when we look at analyzing this chart, which then leads us to the question, so why is this person king? Because if we've got someone, their ascendant lord has less than 100%, it's in the fourth house, which is maybe one of the more hidden houses. We've got a Rahu moon conjunction that's right on the top of the sky, going to be very visible to everyone. We've got these shame devastas. We've got the 11th lord breaking up a Raj Yoga. How can it be possible that this person is a king? It just doesn't seem like quite the right material, does it? And I think that's also true, isn't it? In the public's perception of Charles as a person, as a potential king, he just doesn't necessarily give off that energy of being a ruler. And yet there are some extraordinary yogas in this chart. Having looked at those unexpected weaknesses from the layout, let's now look at some of the things that took me by surprise when we begin to look at the various core yogas taking place. So we're going to have a look at the Kubera Tulya Yoga. We're going to have a look at the Adhi Yoga, the Mukuta Yoga, and the Parajathi Yoga as well. First things first, this Kubera Tulya Yoga. One of the ways to create this yoga is to have the moon exalted in the 10th house, and that's certainly what we have in this chart. And this is an indicator for giving wealth, and it gives so much wealth that one resembles King Kubera, and that's deity in Hinduism and Buddhism that's associated, a very wealthy king. So this is something that begins to tip the tide a little bit. Now we're seeing one indicator for being a king here, and it involves the moon. The moon is exalted in this chart. It's with Rahu, so perhaps there's a little bit of amplifying there. And in terms of a positive yoga score, we have a 2.5 for the moon. So there is some positivity there to amplify this yoga. There is also an Adhi Yoga in this chart, which Adhi Yoga is sometimes called first yoga. And it's created when we have a benefic in the 6th, 7th, and 8th from the moon. So if you look at this chart in your mind, we have the moon up there in Taurus, making the 6th house from the moon would be Libra. We know we have Venus there in Libra. The 7th house from the moon becomes Scorpio. We know we have Mercury there. And the 8th house from the moon becomes Sagittarius, and we have Jupiter in Sagittarius. So lo and behold, we have these 3 benefics in 6, 7, and 8 from the moon. And the statement that goes with Adhi Yoga is one born under Adhi Yoga will be king. So we have another yoga here telling us about the king. In terms of positive yoga score, Mercury has a positive 4.8, Jupiter just 0.5, and Venus a positive 5.1. So a couple of those planets do have some very nice positive yoga scores there. maybe some of the idea about why this yoga works so well is because enemies, partnerships, and other people's resources are all located with benefics. So that might be some of the architecture that makes this yoga work so well. However, there's a caution with this yoga which says any malefic influences to the planets forming the Adhi Yoga indicate intrigues with members of the opposite sex and intrigues with regards to marriage or sexuality. And I thought that was so fascinating because we're aware that Charles originally fell in love with Camilla way back in the early 70s. For various reasons, their match was not seen as a possibility. She married someone else. Eventually, he married someone else. They both, I do believe, tried to end their relationship at various points, and I'm sure that there were periods where they respected that. But then they did end up continuing their relationship during their marriages, and we have this very famous Camilla Gate, in inverted commas, where somebody on a shortwave radio or something picked up the phone calls between Charles and Camilla, and it became quite the scandal and quite the salacious sexual little conversations that they were having. So we have this Adhi Yoga telling us this person's got the potential to become a king, but also that they may get involved in some intrigues regarding the opposite sex. And that is because we have those malefic influences on both Mercury and Jupiter. We know that Mercury is getting shamed. We certainly could also say that Jupiter is getting shamed. So that Camilla Gate, I'm sure, was extremely embarrassing to experience. Maybe that is a result of this particular yoga as well. And then another indicator for a king here, we have a Mukuta Yoga, a crown yoga. Jupiter is in the 8th from the moon and it's in its own rasi. And one of the little quotes from Kala about this is, this yoga presents one with a crown and it may indicate the inheritor of some lineage. So that's a nice, another yoga indicating our regal status here. And then finally, a Parajathi Yoga. And this is created by the dispositor of the Lord of the Lagna Lord. So the Lagna Lord is the sun. It is deposited in Scorpio. So we could say that Mars is the dispositor of the Lagna Lord. So we could look at Mars for part of this yoga, and Mars is in the 5th house in this chart. So it's in a trine. But if we wanted to take the dispositor of Mars, that is in Sagittarius, so Jupiter becomes that dispositor, and that is also in the 5th house, and it's in its own home. So both of those are very good placements. And the D9 lord of that dispositor. So if we wanted to pick on Jupiter as the dispositor, Jupiter is actually also located in Sagittarius in the D9. So that's a tick. Good placement in the D1, good placement in the D9. If we wanted to look at Mars as the dispositor, then it is located in Libra, making Venus important in the D9. And we know that Venus is in its own home back here in the D1. So this yoga, the dispositor of the Lord, of the Lagna Lord, and the D9 lord of that dispositor must be in an angle, trine, own, or exaltation rasi. And we have those conditions here. And this statement that goes with that from the ancient texts is, one will be a sovereign, attentive to their duty and engagements, of compassionate disposition, destined to be happy in the middle and latter portion of life, respected and obeyed by other kings, fond of war, and possessing elephants and horses. Of course, we always love our elephants and horses, but we know that it means of great wealth and resources and vehicles, ways to get around, ways to work the land and make money and be drawn in a carriage, which I'm sure he's probably going to be drawn in a carriage to the coronation. So it's literal as well. So here we have yet again another yoga speaking of kings. And I think this is beautifully weighing up the scales. We think maybe when we look at the D1 and all of those placements, we're feeling like, I don't really understand why this person is king. And then we have a look at these 4 yogas, one on top of another, involving different planets that are telling us this person could be a king. And when we look at the architecture of the chart, we're really going back to what we said right at the beginning. We've got these planets on angles, like we have the luminaries on angles, the moon's on the 10th, the sun's on the 4th. That means they're on angles to each other and angles to the ascendant. So this is creating a strong architecture to the chart. Then we have 2 planets in the 5th house. They both rule 2 houses each. So we've got 4 house lords in a trine. And then Venus, who is not in a angle or trine, is in its own home. So really Saturn's the only outlier here. It's in the 2nd house, but it happens to be very happy there in Virgo, ruled by Mercury. So it's interesting, isn't it? Those fundamentals of the architectural layout feeding into creating so many yogas, so many royal and kingly yogas. And there are some other noteworthy yogas as well. We've got Venus rising before the sun. So it's a Venus Foci yoga. We've got Mars and Jupiter rising after the sun. And then we have a Kapata yoga relating to the 4th house. So let's talk through each of these as well. So the sun, the ascendant lord, is in the 4th house of this chart in Scorpio. And Venus is right next door in Libra, meaning that it rose before Scorpio came up. And this tells us how a person initiates things. And when it is Venus, a benefic, rising before the sun, some of the words we can take from Carla around this are diplomacy, grace, charm, respect, and care. And I think this is a very interesting combination that we have. We spoke about Saturn being on the 2nd house, that this person's voice, the things that come out of their mouth might be a little Saturnine in that they're a bit rough, a bit dry, maybe they go down the wrong way, maybe sometimes they're gaffes, maybe it seems like a weakness. The things that come out of their mouth, that's not their strength, that's not their strongest suit. However, it's tempered with Venus being rising before the sun in this Vesi yoga, meaning that he's putting that thought into speaking gently, speaking quietly. I think he's someone that is not naturally effusive, maybe not naturally charismatic speaker, but does take the time to try to speak thoughtfully and diplomatically. Now, that doesn't always work, and sometimes that Saturn comes through and he says things that are controversial or unpalatable or are just a bit off or a bit embarrassing. But I think Venus is trying to work here to help with that Saturn on the 2nd house. And then we have a couple of planets rising after the sun. We've got Mars in the 5th house in Sagittarius rising after the sun. And when malefics are in these positions around the sun, it's a bit more stressful, right? Because they are creating what they want, what the mission is, but by using stress. So using stressful means to bring about righteousness. When it's Mars, we could say that the person can be willful and with strong opinions. Again, these things are things that kind of when you get to know the person better. So they're not the first impression. That was the Venus thing. When you spend a bit of time with this person and maybe you probe and push, you're going to realize that the person has strong opinions and that they're perhaps willful. And the quote from Carla, the people and things in their lives are utilized for purposes of achieving their objectives. And I took that quote because I think these malefics in this position after the sun mean that we squeeze out from people and things. We really put them under pressure and squeeze out what we need, but maybe a little bit throw that away, or that it's everything has been squeezed out of that personal thing, so they're of no use anymore. A little bit is what I hear implied there. And so I wonder about like relationship management here, that maybe it's not that kind of building and mutual networking relationships over a lifetime, but maybe it's because of his position, perhaps an ability to squeeze and use the situation and the people for achieving these goals around the environment, the preservation of culture and architecture, or the hobbies or the interests he's known for. I think possibly a little bit of Mars utilization there. But it's balanced as well with Jupiter rising after the sun. The person feels content and happy with what they have. So that kind of, again, counterbalances what I was saying before. Perhaps there's some shame about the wealth here, but this Vesi Yoga is saying that they feel happy and that they find purpose and happiness in taking care of these things. And the anecdote that comes to mind for that is, whether it's even true, the shoelaces being ironed, which was hard for me to kind of even understand what that's about. But in the context of Jupiter Vesi Yoga, perhaps it is wanting to preserve those things that are of value. Perhaps that's that. And then there is a Kubera Yoga here, which in Kala is described in the English word as deceit yoga. And it can be created by a malefic in the fourth. And in this case, we have K2 in the fourth. And the fourth lord, which in this case is Mars, under malefic influences. And here the fourth lord, Mars, is getting a rasi aspect from Saturn, because Mars is in Sagittarius, Saturn is in Virgo. So they are both in those mutable signs, and all mutable signs give rasi aspects to each other. And the deceit yoga can indicate that the person is not what they appear to be. In the quote from Kala, oftentimes these natives hide things from themselves first, and as a consequence, secondarily, they hide things from others. So I think this is an important yoga to discuss in the context of this chart. We already know that there's a Shamdavashta going on. We already know that this moon Rahu maybe creates unusual, unconventional mind and emotions, but the institution that he's born into is maybe not the right place to be emotionally expressive. So perhaps a cause of shame, and maybe creating inside the self a secret world, or learning how to present to the outside world an official self that is required for this very unusual life that is very public and very on the public stage all the time, but perhaps has a secret relationship with the self. And then that, of course, makes it very hard to be honest in one's decisions about one's life, because one is not even being honest to oneself about how one really feels. And therefore, it can seem as if one is deceiving other people. But really, it starts with deceiving the self. And it's happening in Scorpio. We also have the sun in Scorpio. And we know that this is maybe around keeping secrets. So I have here a quote from Decoding the Zodiac about the sun in Scorpio, that it creates an intriguing personality who are empowered by their secrets. Since the ultimate goal of the sun is to establish a life of autonomy, Scorpio ability of empowerment through secrecy can resonate with the cause. However, good leaders would not hide their power, rather they would want their subjects to benefit from it. In fact, an ideal king's first concern would be to empower the people of his kingdom. Therefore, the tendency of keeping secrets in order to secure their status is not compatible with the straightforward and dignified nature of the sun, who wants to be the best, not by using secret weapons, but through self-sacrifice and consistency. Therefore, Scorpio sun interactions turn out to be more dissonant than resonant in practice. So that was an observation about sun, Scorpio, and secrets. where we know that we have this deceit yoga here as well. And we know that we have Venus in its own home in Vasa Yoga, helping us come across as being diplomatic and charming. So I'm just wondering whether Venus has helped to create also this image, the public image. And we know that Venus is ruling Taurus that has Rahu in it. Rahu can be deceptive as well. So for all of these reasons, it makes me think about keeping secrets and what a unique life this is, a very public life, how important it is to need to have a private life, but you're never really ever going to get a private life, and you must have lots of secrets. You can imagine that the Queen has met so many prime ministers and politicians, and she must have her own opinion about all of them, but she can never share that, and this person's going into that same role, that the importance of keeping secrets cannot be overstated. That's part of their MO, part of what's required of their job. And then we know that the royal family has been involved in perhaps having money in offshore accounts and secret identities. We know that they don't necessarily reveal their wealth. We know that when Prince Philip died, his will was not revealed. And so we know a lot of the wealth that they own, but we don't know all of it. And I'm sure that King Charles knows more than we do. So there's lots of secrets that go with this life. And I think there are many things in the chart that are supporting that. Now, there are some other honorable mentions for yogas in this chart as well. You can see why, for me, this was an extraordinary chart in terms of yogas. I want to talk a little bit about Camilla, because all of this research for me came about because of our Astrolojam into compatibility. So we had a look at Camilla and Diana's chart. So I want to have a look at the deceit yoga that's in Camilla's chart and also look at the compatibility. And then I just want to also talk about slavery reparations, which is a topic that has come up this month in April 2023. So we know that in King Charles' chart, there was a deceit yoga, and we also have one in Camilla's chart. So if you're very comfortable now with King Charles's chart, we can put it to one side knowing that we can pick it up again if needed. We know it's a Leo ascendant. We know we've got a lot going on in the 4th, a little bit in the 5th, and we've got the Moon Rahu in the 10th. So take your mental snapshot, put King Charles's chart to the side. And in Camilla's chart, in tropical, you wouldn't believe it, it's also a Leo ascendant. So it keeps it easy for us today. So imagine your Leo ascendant, but this time we have Saturn on the 1st house in Leo, no planets in Virgo, the 2nd house, no planets in Libra, the 3rd house. We have Jupiter in the 4th house in Scorpio, Sagittarius, 5th house, Ketu, nothing in Capricorn, the 6th house, nothing in Aquarius, the 7th house, nothing in Pisces, the 8th house, nothing in Aries, the 9th house, nothing in the 10th house in Taurus, because I'm saving it all to the end to let you know that I have Rahu and Mars in the 11th house in Gemini. And then in the 12th house, I've got Moon, Venus, Mercury, and Sun. So lots of information in the 11th house and 12th house of this chart. And in fact, all of the planets are in 11, 12, and 1, except for Jupiter, that's in the 4th. Okay, so in this chart, we have a deceit yoga created through slightly different conditions than King Charles. In this chart, it's created by having the 4th Lord, which we know is Mars. Same as King Charles, Mars is the 4th Lord, and it is, in this case, with Rahu, and it is getting a rasi aspect from Ketu. So Queen Camilla's deceit yoga is created by the 4th Lord Mars being with Rahu and receiving a rasi aspect from Ketu in Sagittarius. This is a less severe deceit yoga. It's not as strong. And we must say that all of these deceit yogas need to be taken in the context of the chart, because you're going to see this yoga relatively often. Like, it comes up. I see it quite often. But I think it's wonderful to talk about in the context of these charts because of secrets. We've talked about Charles just now with all of the secrets. We can see that in this chart, there's also a deceit yoga, the person deceiving themselves, therefore deceiving others. And we know that both of these people were able to live a secret life. They had a very long-term romance that, by and large, they kept secret. They were married. Both of them were married at different times throughout this long affair. So they were keeping secrets from their spouses and from the public. Now, we also notice in this chart of Camilla that we have a lot of information in the 12th house, and the 12th house, we can consider it to be a house of secrets. This makes me think about how important is it to be able to keep secrets when you are a member of the royal family. How important is it to be able to keep secrets? And when you are looking for an intimate partner, is it actually important to look for someone who you know can keep secrets? Because then you can share your real opinion, knowing that the other person has all of the setup in their chart to keep that secret for you. If you had the opposite where you've got all these secrets, but your partner's a very open book, you might be afraid to share the true opinions because it would just come out the next dinner party, all of your secrets would be revealed. So maybe there's a compatibility issue here where finding two people who can equally keep secrets, maybe that's a real catch. Maybe that's a really important connection to have. And then because we were doing compatibility, we actually, of course, used Carla's moon compatibility to compare these two charts. And I was certainly expecting to find that the match between Charles and Camilla was much more compatible than the match with Charles and Diana. And yet, if we just take it at face value, just a total points score situation, according to Carla, looking at these both as tropical, we've got 18 points of compatibility for Charles and Diana and 18.5 for Charles and Camilla. So not much difference there in terms of overall points. So that was a little bit of a surprise. I love the compatibility program that's inside Carla. I already have a podcast about that, so I'm not going to go in and out of the details of this moon compatibility comparison. But I would really recommend, if you have the time, to go have a look and see where these two people are and are not compatible. For example, some of the things that stood out was that the difference between the moons. So in Charles and Diana, the moons are relatively close together. And Carla lets us know that means that the woman ends up initiating when really she'd love the man to do it, but her moon gets there first and she does it. And then the man can be a bit flustered because he feels like he never gets a chance to really know what he wants. And you see that a little bit, that Diana became more and more famous and more beautiful and more attractive, and he could never kind of catch up. So I thought that was a really interesting mismatch, whereas Charles and Camilla don't have that. They have a good distance between their moons, so a good balance between initiating and receiving. Another thing that I thought was really interesting was the nakshatras can be put into groups of human nakshatras, angelic nakshatras, and demonic nakshatras. And that ideally, for emotional compatibility, the nakshatras should be compatible. And on Charles and Diana, I think it was Diana's that got a demonic nakshatra and Charles got an angelic one, meaning that from Charles's perspective, Diana's emotions might have seemed out of control at times and scary, and he was maybe too sensitive to be exposed to that or to get into the cut and thrust of all of that. Whereas over on the Camilla and Charles side, they both have angelic, so much more compatible emotional environment inside the couple. And that goes on and on. So you can go through all of these different criteria and have a look. But at the end of the day, when all those points are added up, 18 for one, 18.5 for the other. So then one of the things that stood out to me is below the point counting, there are 2 extra compatibility factors that Carla suggests are not make or break, but are nice to have if you have them. And on Charles and Diana, they do not have either of these 2 extras. Whereas on Camilla and Charles, they have both. So the first one is called Mahendra, and it is based on the nakshatras being a particular number away, like 4, 7, 10, something like that. And it goes on 13, and it counts through these various relationships of the nakshatras. And it says that if you have this Mahendra, you're going to have a purposeful connection that just grows over time. You find meaning in this relationship over time. And I just thought how nice that was, because this has been a relationship that is really long lasting, and that it must be lovely for them to have that connection and feel that it's grown even more purposeful over time. Perhaps it was a fun affair at the beginning that maybe neither of them thought had any chance of going anywhere, and yet over time it's become such an important and meaningful connection. And then right underneath that, there's a Vasya connection, and this is an exceptional one, not the main one that's counted, but an exceptional one, where it's about the moons having magnetic attraction to each other. And in this case, Camilla feels a magnetic attraction towards Charles's moon. So this is saying that no matter what, the woman in this particular compatibility configuration is going to be drawn to that man. And I just wondered how, on the receiving side, on Charles's side, how valuable that might actually be, because we know that although he has a wonderful mother, King Charles has a wonderful mother, an amazing person doing just an incredible job, a job in a man's world, holding her own, creating so much respect over a lifetime. But not an easy thing to do. When she became queen, there were not a lot of female CEOs. She's really had to break the new ground. And was she able to emotionally be there for this Charles child? And therefore, how nice, how valuable, how important is it for him that Camilla has this attraction to him, that no matter what, she's going to be drawn to him? Maybe that's a really beautiful thing to have. So I wonder whether these 2 exceptional extras are really bumping up that compatibility score. And I'll be interested to hear your feedback if you have those in your compatibility partnerships. And of course, I'm adding here that deceit yoga, that maybe this ability to keep secrets, to hold secrets, to live a secret life, perhaps this is a really important part of compatibility too. And there were many other parts of that Astrolojam conversation about compatibility. So if you ever want to join us, we put out a chart or a couple of charts to research in advance, and then we get together and jam on the things that we found, the things that we understood, the things we didn't understand. We inspire each other. We try out new techniques that we maybe haven't tried or wouldn't try yet with clients, but we can try them and discuss them among peers in a safe environment. You're all welcome anytime. Come along to Astrolojam. The final thing that I wanted to look at in the yogas was another extraordinary yoga called the Srikanta Yoga. And this involves the Lagna Lord, the sun and the moon being in angles. So now in this case, the Lagna Lord is the sun. So the sun and moon in angles or trines, in this case it's angles, and those angles are either their own sign, friendly signs, or exaltation signs. And that's the case that we have the moon in its exaltation sign and the sun in a friendly sign, Scorpio. So this yoga is related to Shiva, And the quote from Carla says, when this yoga is present, it indicates spiritual tendencies. And I think this is something that perhaps I haven't highlighted enough in this chart, that Charles has a lot of moksha energy in his birth chart, right? We've got 3 planets in the 4th house, which is a moksha house. We've got the 12th lord, a moksha lord, is in the 10th house with a node, so right at the top of the sky, very visible. And then the 8th lord is in a trine, and it's Jupiter. So all of those things really, along with others, we talked about the moon being with Rahu and even sun being with Ketu. These are things that give us dissatisfaction with the material world. So that leads us often towards a spiritual path. So when this yoga is present, it indicates a spiritual tendency, and that resonates with many things in the D1 as well. However, it also usually indicates that the native is somehow involved in something that has a destructive aspect. So I think this is interesting. I'm putting it here to talk about what will the Charles III period be like? What will his legacy be? And will we see the end of the monarchy, or we see the lessening of the monarchy? We know that the separation from Diana and the divorce was considered to be very destructive. It was something that I'm sure before it happened, there would have been a lot of pressure for it not to happen. It was seen as something that could destroy the monarchy. As it happened, it didn't. And in fact, he's gone to marry the woman that he loves. But are there other destructive things that could happen? And we know that obviously we have the whole Harry situation that is still causing tension there. And we've had him writing a book of secrets as well. And will that destroy the monarchy during this rulership? But one of the things that has come up just this month is the idea of perhaps paying reparations, or at least investigating reparations for the slavery that the royal family was involved in and directly benefited from. So how much of their wealth has come from other people's slavery? So we know that we've got this Srikanta Yoga that could perhaps have that Shiva detoxifying destructive element. Then we know that the sun in Scorpio, again, quoting from the Decoding the Zodiac book, Scorpio enables us to dig deep into certain aspects of life with intense resolve and tenacity to obtain empowering secrets, knowledge, disregarding social controversies, risks, and the challenges involved. So even that Charles has said yes to investigating the slavery background is quite a bold and in some ways controversial thing to do. We don't know whether Queen Elizabeth would have done that. Going back to the book, a natural tendency to explore secrets that they believe can make them more powerful. I don't know that this is going to make them more powerful, maybe less. A natural tendency to secretly venture into feared or controversial aspects. For example, death or sex, the occult, archaeology, violence. So slavery kind of fits into that as well. So we've got the sun perhaps being in a position where this person has a capacity to investigate hidden things. We've got the Srikanta Yoga perhaps helping to detoxify things. And then we have this 11th Lord being shamed. And I'm thinking of the 11th Lord as being the institution. So that's why I'm interested. It's being shamed in this chart. Is it going to be a cause of shame? Is the king going to cause shame to the institution? And we have to remember that this 11th Lord is breaking that Raj Yoga of happiness, the first Lord in the 4th house, a yoga for happiness, and yet the 11th Lord is there. The institution is breaking that. So I thought it was just really extraordinary to have this Shiva-based yoga showing up in King Charles's chart. So to draw that all together, I hope that you have enjoyed having a look through King Charles' chart with me and weighing up on the scales the indicators in the D1, which seem to show that it's an unlikely chart for a king at face value. We've got the sun below 100% Shadbala. We've got at least one, maybe two Shamdavashtas. Got both of the luminaries are with nodes. We've got Lo Shadbala for direction, for conflict resolution, and for confidence. And we've got the 12th Lord in the 10th house. So all of those things don't fit the mold of our bold, bright, shining leader. But on the same chart, the very same chart, we've got multiple yogas indicating the king status. We've got that Kubera rich wealth royal yoga. We've got the Adhi Yoga being the first at something, making us the king, the ruler. We've got the Mukuta Yoga of wearing a crown. And then we've got the Parajathi Yoga, where all of those dispositors in the D1 and the D9 are in angles, trines, or own houses, helping us be a king, be a ruler, and have enormous wealth and resources. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and see you at Astrolojam. You can join me on that through Patreon, where our conversation continues. We get together and meditate a couple of times a week, and I drop in there my ideas for the podcast and my notes. So if you want to be part of my community, it's a very easy thing to do because your suggestions form part of what I'm covering in the podcast, and I'd love to hear from you. Okay, look forward to being with you the next time that we are together on the Vedic Astrology Podcast. Bye for now.